So I was contacted by some constituents, elderly constituents who live on a rural property in the outskirts of my electorate, and they're concerned about the vegetation growth on the curb outside their property, which is basically under the responsibility of the council, but the City of Armadale weren't really interested in coming to mow the vegetation, and they were concerned about snakes and fire hazards, etc. So I contacted the Red Cross cadets up at Southern Christian College up in Bedfordale, and they came within a week, cleared the vegetation, and have offered to assist clearing the vegetation on a regular occurrence. So this elderly couple were absolutely flabbergasted that these young people came at a quick notice and did such a fantastic job, and it really reaffirmed, or shall I say, changed their view on youth in our society. Well, look, there's no doubt there is a bit of a negative view on much of our youth in West Australia, and it's probably worldwide. And there's problems with alcohol consumption, drugs, etc., and just trying to engage the youth. And I think things like the Red Cross Cadets and other voluntary organisations where you can see the youth actually engaging with the community, especially elderly people, it will be something that can hopefully change the image or the negative perspective or perception that we have of youth people. Yeah, look, I think a lot of young people are unsure of their place in society, and a bit shy, and would actually volunteer if there was a proper structure or process for them to be involved. So something like the Red Cross Cadets provides that structure, an institutionalised format for them to get involved. So it's a lot easier for them to do things, but it's hard probably for an individual person, especially a young person, to say, well, I want to volunteer to do X, Y, Z, but at least by becoming part of a formalised organisation, it's a lot easier. So I think it's fantastic if we can try and get more organised voluntary groups, especially for young people. It's an interesting question about volunteers and volunteering activities, because if you look at a lot of groups today that volunteer, like Meals on Wheels, it's the elderly that are doing the volunteering. And we're getting an ageing population, and if we don't have the youth that come in to offer their assistance or to replace the ageing population, don't get me wrong, I think it's fantastic if elderly people can volunteer. I mean, that's brilliant, but there does become a point where they aren't physically able to do so. So if we can try and get younger people involved and then maybe carry that through for the next 30, 40, 50 years, surely that's going to help our community. And there's a real disconnect in many respects between the community and families and individuals. And I don't know what if there's been studies done on this, but the modern phenomenon of the fly-in, fly-out worker, that has an effect on people being involved in communities. Like you have signs on the highways that players wanted at a football club. Well, you never would have had that 20 years ago. And so there's a real stress on trying to make sure these community groups survive. So we can engage the youth to become more community minded and volunteer their services. I would hope that would maybe bring back a greater sense of community spirit. There's no doubt that there are certain pockets of major social disadvantage in the Armadale region. Armadale has a lot going for it, and just the natural beauty of the hills and the city centre. But as I said, there is some major pockets of disadvantage. So, it's quite clear when there's major socio-economic problems, is always associated with criminal activity, and therefore, we do have particular issues in regards to crime in Armadale. We're not the only area, obviously, but we do have major problems here, and that's why we need to look at how can we try and invest in our youth and young people so they don't go down that road. The studies are quite clear, the evidence is quite clear. If you disengage at school, if you become marginalised at school, the chances are that you're going to engage in antisocial behaviour and you're on the road or on the track to committing criminal offences and ending up in jail. So we need to put more money, governments and society as a whole, into trying to invest in our young people, even before they get to school, might I say, but follow them through, and when they get to that teenage area where there's a lot of other pressures and where kids are actually very uncertain, and if they don't feel part of a family or part of a community, they're going to often do things to attract attention to themselves, or to lash out or to rebel because they don't feel part of a society. So unless we invest in families and individuals and communities, we're going to, of course, have increased antisocial and criminal activity.
What do we do?
Yeah, well, look, you know, there's no doubt Armadale has a bad negative perception, and you know, there was a program on one of the major current affairs shows last year that said that Armadale was the worst suburb in Perth, along with Balga, and I took offence to that as being a long-term resident of Armadale, and got another TV station do a more positive view of Armadale, because there are a lot of positives. However, as I said, there are also particular concerns in Armadale that we need to address, and there doesn't seem to be enough investment by governments into those particular problems. And if we don't do that, well, we're always going to have that perception. That perception is going to be with us for a long period of time. But on the flip side of that, there was a recent survey on property values or property investments, and Armadale was considered the 4th best in Australia. But that's basically because it is close to the railway line, close to a lot of services, and it's at the cheaper end of the real estate market. So the relative investment benefits are greater than, say, more expensive areas.